Hey everyone, it's Cameron, the host of Teen Talk. I'm so excited to be talking to some former student members of the board, including the incredible Dr. Anthony Arend in this special episode. I'll see you guys soon on Teen Talk. Hey there, AACPS. My name is Cameron Sherry, and welcome to Teen Talk. This is a show for students, by students, and today's episode is very special. As some of you may know, nominations for the Student Member of the Board open on February 23rd. The Student Member of the Board, otherwise known as the SMOB, is a high school student who serves on the Board of Education to represent the student perspective. Here in Anne Arundel County, this is a high school senior who serves a one-year term on the board. Students are nominated for the position, complete an application, and take part in a panel interview. Through this rigorous process, 3 student candidates are selected. In late April, middle and high school student delegates across the county have the opportunity to elect the next student member each school year. Today, I am beyond excited to welcome Dr. Anthony Arend into the studio. Dr. Arend was second student member of the board in AACPS and the first with full voting rights. Dr. Arend served as the SMOB from 1975 to 1976 and graduated from Arundel High School. He went on to earn a Bachelor's of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University, as well as a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Virginia. Dr. Arend is currently a professor of government and foreign service, as well as the Department of Government chair at Georgetown University. He's also published numerous articles and 7 books. He is an extremely accomplished and outstanding human. I am so honored to have you in the studio today. How are you doing, Dr. Arend?
Cameron, I'm fine. I'm excited to be here. I love your excitement and your energy, so it's an honor to be back.
Well, thank you. We are so happy to have you. We're going to jump right into it with our questions. You were the first SMOB in Anne Arundel County with full voting rights in 1975 to 1976, and you were also the CRASC president beforehand. What can you tell us about the switch to full voting?
Well, it was a really interesting circumstance in those days, and I should begin by saying we never used the term SMOB. That's a new one on us.
Really?
No, it was always referred to as the student member on the board or a board member who happened to be a student. And that was actually something really important for us. Matter of fact, I brought the card
Oh my gosh.
I had when I was a student on the board.
Wow. This
Now-
is a Teen Talk first.
It probably is. Now, if you look at what it says under my name, what doesn't it say?
It does not say student.
It does not say student, and that was by intent.
Incredible.
Our whole goal, and the way we were able to get this through the state legislature and through the governor's signature, was by saying the student member is not a student representative. That's what the president of CRASC does. The student member brings a unique perspective into the educational process because he or she sits behind a desk every day and sees a side of education that the other board members don't. So that's very important to have that perspective. But when you're on the board, you have equal rights to the other members and you are to be regarded as just another member who happens to be a student. Now that was the argument we made to the governor, because there were some people who said, well, if you're going to have a student representative, shouldn't you have a teacher's representative? Shouldn't you have a representative from the staff? And what we said was, no. They're not a representative. They're there to provide this unique viewpoint. They're a member of the board. Now, the way the process developed was actually very serendipitous. I was the parliamentarian of CRASC, and I happened to read in the Maryland Gazette that Senator Robert A. Paschal had introduced a bill to put a voting student member on the County Board of Education. So, bottom line, we contacted Senator Paschal's office and we said, let's meet and let's talk about this. So we had a conversation with Senator Paschal. We saw a copy of the bill, and the copy of the bill didn't have a vote in it. And so we said to Senator Paschal, well, can you change this? He said, sure, we'll change it. So they changed it to a voting position. They said that the person would be elected in a manner determined by the Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils, which was great because we didn't have to spell out the selection process. It passed the House of Delegates. It passed the Senate. But somewhere in that process, the vote was taken out and the governor signed it. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but I then became president of CRASC, And one of my major goals was to try to get the vote reestablished, to try to make the position a full voting position. So the first student member, my dear friend Jeff Robinson from Andover High School, which no longer exists, served valiantly in that position without a vote. But he did everything else aside from vote. He sat in on closed sessions, he attended conferences, he participated in everything else, and he set the gold standard as to how a student member would behave. Okay, so that was 1974 to 1975. So I'm president of CRASC during that time period. During the election campaign of 1974, I went to a tea and I met Delegate Michael Wagner, and I asked him a question. Now, he's running for the House of Delegates, so he's not even a delegate at the time. And I said, Mr. Wagner, would you be willing to introduce a bill to give the student member on the Anne Arundel County Board of Education a vote? He said yes. Okay. He was elected. So I went into the phone book, found his phone number. Used to be able to do that in those days. Found his phone number, called him up and said, Delegate Wagner, you remember me? And he did. And he said, oh, we met at thus and such a place. He did remember. And I said, would you be willing to introduce this bill? He said, yes. Now, I had to follow up a couple of times to get him, but he then went to Bob Neal, who was also a member of the House of Delegates, and they co-sponsored it. Now, what's really important about Wagner and Neal, Wagner was a Democrat, Neal was a Republican.
Oh, wow.
So it was co-sponsored in a bipartisan way. It flew through the House and flew through the Senate, and then the Anne Arundel County Board of Education decided to oppose it by a vote of 5-2.
Oh my gosh.
Now, why did they oppose it? Not because, at least this is what they said, not because it's horrible to have a voting student or that there's some kind of philosophical problems, but they said it violates Maryland state law, which at the time was in the Annotated Code of Maryland, which said that someone cannot serve on the board if they are under the authority of the board. And of course, students are under the authority of the board. So I thought, okay, this is a legal opposition. So what did I do? I went to the Assistant Attorney General, a guy named George A. Nielsen, and I asked him about this. And he said, oh, this had come up before when Prince George's County was trying to get a student on the board, and I have an Attorney General's opinion which says it's not a problem. So I wrote a letter to the president of the board and explained this, but because the board had opposed it, a veto hearing was scheduled before Governor Marvin Mandel. So I coordinated the proponents of the bill, somebody else coordinated the opponents. We appeared before Governor Mandel, and the arguments we made before the governor were that we don't have a student representative, that students are competent to do that, and full voting privileges will enable them to be even better, even more participating board members. The governor signed the bill. Now that's perhaps a long story, but that's kind of what happened lo these many years.
Well, that's an incredible story, and it's so great to hear the involvement from not only yourself and other delegates and representatives within the state, but also students in CRASC. I'm a member of CRASC, and it's so great to hear that even back then kids were so involved. And you kind of touched on this already, but why is it so important that a student has full voting rights?
Well, so the governor only asked one question at this hearing. You know, I'm going on doing my thing, and I've got various other people testifying, and there were some opponents, and they were testifying. The governor only asked one question, and the question was to Jeff Robinson, the non-voting student member. And the question was, if you would have had a vote, would it have altered what you would have done? And Jeff basically said, after thinking about that for a second, yes, it would have made me participate more vigorously. Now, not that Jeff didn't participate vigorously. It would have made me participate in a more responsible way. Not that he didn't participate in a responsible way, but it would have taken a whole different level of gravity that would have engaged him. And I don't know whether it was that response that convinced the governor or something else, but the governor signed the bill. So I think having full voting privileges, being able to vote on everything, is critical to be able to say, I'm a member just like everybody else. So I voted on the budget. I voted on decisions relating to opening new schools, to school construction. I voted on renewing the superintendent's contract. I voted on negotiations. We had negotiations with various units, the Teachers Association, various staff associations and the like. Voted on everything. I went to conferences with the board, and it really enabled me to be able to interact with the board members as a full peer, a full equal, even though I was 16 years old.
That is incredible. 16 years old?
I think that's right, yeah.
You were a junior or a senior in high school?
I was a senior, so I, let's see if I can get this right. So I started in 1975, and I was 16 when I started in July, and then I turned 17 in October 24th, if anybody wants to send me anything. I turned 17. So I started when I was 16 and then turned 17 while I was on the board.
Wow. Well, I'm October 5th, so we've got some October babies over here.
It's a good month.
It's a great month. Perfect. Talking a little bit more about your time as student member, did you experience any resistance as you worked towards demonstrating full voting rights and as you stepped into this role yourself?
Not at all. As I said, there was opposition on a legal claim to establishing the position as a full voting position. But once I was on the board, the staff, the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, and all my fellow board members treated me as an equal. It was wonderful. And needless to say, I think the next youngest person was maybe 29. It was Tyson Bennett, who had also just been appointed to the board. But there were people on the board that were in their 60s and probably their 70s. They treated me as an equal. We used to go to dinner all the time. We would have lunches all the time, working dinners, working lunches. We also went on conferences. The Association of various schools of education that would go here or there, Maryland Association of Boards of Education, all sorts of conferences. And I was always treated with respect and as an equal. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So I was treated just like any other board member. That's exactly how I wanted to be treated.
And who encouraged you to run for this position, or what made you decide this is what I need to do next as a student?
Well, so that's a good question. And the interesting answer is people may have just assumed because I'd worked on the creation of the position, I'd been president of CRASC, and one of my main goals was to create a voting privileges for the position. But the truth is, I was torn between running for president of the Maryland Association of Student Councils and running for the board position. A guy named Mike Magruder, who was the president of the Prince George's County Student Government Association, actually said, Tony, I want to nominate you to be president of MASC. And so I was thinking about it, and I talked to Stacy Pellegrin's predecessor many years ago, Jean Bowden. And she said, you really should run for the board position. I think it's best that you run for the board position. But it was a real choice because I thought being president of MASC might have taken me into a lot of different areas that I hadn't experienced before. But it was really Jean Bowden saying that to me that led me to run for the student position.
That's incredible. And you mentioned Ms. Pellegrin. We love Ms. Pellegrin. She's a producer on the show.
As I do too.
Yeah, Ms. Pellegrin. Yes, absolutely. What was the campaigning process like when you ran for SMOB, and what was the best piece of advice you received during your campaign?
So I'm not sure I received, I guess the best piece of advice was when Jean Bowden said I should run for the position.
Right. Of course.
In those days, and now my mind gets a little foggy on the specifics. Matter of fact, it's funny because I reflected on the campaign and I have little recollection of the actual campaign. I remember more about the details of being on the board. I remember more about the details of creating the position. But as I recall in those days, schools could nominate people. So high schools could nominate people. And so there was an election. I graduated from Arundel High School, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So there was an election at Arundel High School where actually a close friend of mine was running against me. And I defeated him. He's now a professor at UCLA Law School and is a great friend. I was his best man at his wedding, but a guy named Stephen Bainbridge. But I won the nomination at Arundel, and then Arundel nominated me at a special CRASC convention, I guess, that was convened. And as I recall, and again, my mind's a little bit fuzzy because this was 1975, there was one other person that Andover nominated to run against me. And the irony is the person was nominated by Jeff Robinson, who was the current student on the board. And he kind of apologized and said, oh, that might have looked bad. And it wasn't that he didn't support me, but he was from Andover. In any event, I defeated this person and went on to win the election. And that is my memory. As I said, it's a little foggy because maybe campaigns sometimes just fly out of your memory. So I don't have great recollection, but I believe that to be accurate.
Yes, well, a very late congratulations.
Thank you.
Many, many years later.
Thank you.
Very proud of you. What was the position, and you've talked about this a little bit, what was the position of SMOB like when you were elected, and what did being the student member include? What were some things that you worked on?
So everything it included. So, we had 2 meetings a month. We had hearings for the budget, special budget hearings, which, as I recall, we held around the county. We had capital budget hearings where we talked about construction and other projects. We dealt with all that. As I mentioned, we had negotiations. So there were, at the time, 6 different negotiating units. And there was a gentleman here named Grady Ballard who was in charge of sort of coordinating all those negotiations. But we negotiated with the Teachers Association of Anne Arundel County. There were negotiations with administrators. There was an association of administrators. There was an association for secretaries. There was an association for classified employees. So there were all these. So that was actually, which you wouldn't think. You wouldn't necessarily think, well, gee, you're dealing with labor relations, but you were. And having never worked, I was suddenly in management. I was suddenly on the management side of the table negotiating with the teachers union. Now, I wasn't actually doing the negotiations, but the proposals would come to the board, and the board would have to deliberate on those proposals all in closed session, and then the negotiators would go back, and then ultimately we would approve the contract. So that's not necessarily something anybody thinks they have to do, but we did that. We had at least one, or not at least, we had one appeal on an expulsion case, so I sat in on that. We also, as I mentioned, and this was very important, very political, had a decision on the renewal of the superintendent's contract. Now, the superintendent in my day was Edward Anderson, and he started as superintendent in 1968, and he stayed as superintendent until 1984. So he was a long-standing superintendent. When I was on the board, he was about 70 years old, and he was brilliant. I believe he had his doctorate from Harvard. Brilliant man, but very controversial. He was perceived by many to be authoritarian and not transparent, and so there were a lot of folks that weren't big fans of Dr. Anderson. Well, I got letters, and this is no emails in those days, so I got letters and phone calls and everything saying, you got to oppose this guy, he's too authoritarian. Okay. And there were 2 board members that actually opposed the renewal of his contract. Remember, there are 8 of us. So there were 2 that opposed the renewal of his contract, and at least I think both of them contacted me and were trying to get me to oppose the contract renewal. And what's interesting is, from a purely political standpoint, I remember thinking this at the time, it would be easy to vote against his contract, because then you'd go down as standing up to the man, showing, student solidarity with the other 2 board members and blah, 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 blah. But it wasn't the right thing to do. And I remember spending a lot of time thinking about this and realizing that even though if I wanted to get publicity, even though if I wanted to be seen as, so the great dissenter or something, I could have voted against him. But I felt it was the wrong thing to do. And I got a little pushback in the press, the Maryland Gazette, not a lot. There were just some negative things on that, but I felt like I did the right thing. I think that was a very important learning experience, and also something that anybody that would be running for the board needs to know is that you have all these kinds of things that come up, and especially now with social media. We didn't have social media in those days. We barely had TV. Not quite, but it's very easy to be in a position like that and to make it into something that draws attention to yourself. More so than it was then. I mean, I could have gone to the press, I could have done this, could have done whatever. But now you can just tweet something out, you can post it on Instagram, you can do a TikTok, although I'm worried about China, so we won't get into TikTok. But you could do something like that and make a big deal out of yourself. And that's going to be a temptation. But when you're on the board, whether you're a student, whether you're not a student, your goal is to do what is in the best interest of the people of Anne Arundel County and the students of Anne Arundel County, not what's in your own best interest. And so that's one of the lessons I learned. And I would say anybody running for the board now needs to realize that that's what they need to do as well.
Absolutely. That is absolutely incredible. When we come back, we will hear more from the incredible Dr. Arend. But first, let's hear from 5 of our most recent student members on their unique experiences in the position and some advice for those considering running.
Josie, you are the only SMOP who has served in a leadership capacity as the vice president of the board. How did that role impact your time as a student member?
So I was in a very unique role because at the time when I was elected, I was senior to like a majority of the board, since I was the member that served as a student during the transition between appointed to an elected board. I think it kind of put SMOBs on the map. I know I got reached out to by students in California, students in Virginia, wanting to talk about like how to expand, like not only expand, but also create kind of SMOB in their districts. And so I think it really propelled student in general. And so I think it was important that I did that because I was given the opportunity and I didn't want to shy away from it and like kind of shed a bad light on the student member. And I wanted to make sure that like I was able to make a lasting impact as a student member. So it was a unique experience, but I definitely learned a lot, and I wouldn't change the fact that I was a vice president because I know it was very controversial. I got a lot of backlash because of it, but I think that it brought more positive to the role than the negative. And we haven't lost voting rights because I know that a bill was put in like the year after that I was president or vice president to try to take away our voting rights and to make sure that we can't be in a leadership capacity. But I think that it showed that adults on the board can not only work with us, but also listen to our voice and allow us to take these leadership roles.
What do you consider to be your most impactful decision as SMOB?
I would say that my most impactful decision was kind of creating the policy that shifted the way that we look at valedictorian, salutatorian, as well as class rank. I would say that that's the most impactful decision I made because I remember when I was kind of working on that policy initiative and trying to garner votes with the other members, I not only learned about what their perspective on education for Anne Arundel County is, but I was able to like form more relationships from students with other counties. I worked with students from like Howard County, Montgomery County, SMOBs from across the state. So I think it was really impactful because not only did it show how students can come together and support other student members or students in Anne Arundel County behind an initiative and take charge of our education again, but it really did shift the way that students look at their own education in our county. I mean, I'm not able to see how it came to fruition after my term ended, but I know that it was really monumental because we weren't the first, but we did follow suit in like Montgomery County in getting rid of class rank and changing the way that we do valedictorian, salutatorian. And so it was really pivotal for our county. I know Dr. Arlotto really wanted to do that for many years. So I think that it was the most impactful decision, not only because it showed a student member taking lead in an educational initiative and following through with it, getting them votes and kind of passing the policy, but also because it is such a huge change for our county. And so again, it just goes back to like student members being able to really make impactful changes.
What advice do you have for our future students?
Again, I think my role was unique because I was on the board during the transition. So halfway through my role, we had elected members comprise half of the board. And so I really saw how politics, even though we are supposed to be a nonpartisan, I saw how politics and so many board members quoting like the campaign trail, it became a huge player in the way that we operated. And so I know from now on, we are a fully elected board. And so I would really say my advice would be to the student members is to not let politics impact you and your decisions. I know that we have our own election, but we're not running with like, you know, and we run on like a platform, students vote based on our speech, everything. But it is really because behind the scenes you see how people like pass votes and people like kind of are by their, which I think is important because more people the way that their children are taught and their education, but it is important to be true to like the kind of the campaign trail in politics. So that would be my advice, is really just true to yourself, which I know is cliche, but I think it is important times when you're making really tough decisions. And I mean, I was in a lot of times where I knew that if I voted for something, some not vote for my initiative, or it would really shift our relationship. I think sure that you just stay true to yourself is really and the students need.
What do you consider to be your most impactful decision as SMOB?
So as SMOB, obviously throughout my year, I was able to do a lot of things. Having full voting rights, I was able to vote on budget. And so the thing that I believe was my most impactful decision was amending our budget to include funding for menstrual products in all ACPS schools. So if you are in a ACPS school right now, you go to the ladies' room, you should see a period product dispenser that gives you your pads or tampons for absolutely free. And this is something that I always thought should be a right, not just a luxury. And as a girl, you know, there were times where I needed friends to come in and give me menstrual products. So I'm glad that now in ACPS, you don't have to worry about that for all of our students that menstruate.
How has the role of the student member impacted your life after AACPS?
I think serving as a student of the Board of Education definitely a highlight in any student's career, especially for me, because it really set me apart when I got to college. I didn't realize just how much you grow in that year from, 2 meetings a month, plus the committees meetings, plus just traveling around. It really grew me professionally and just in a mature sense, and forever grateful for some of the opportunities, because now I'm in all these political science classes and everything they're talking about, from like budgeting to running governments to just how stuff works. I've lived through it all, so it has prepared me immensely.
If you could change one thing about your term, what would it be?
So I had the opportunity to serve as SMOB during 2020. So that is when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And I think the one thing I would change would be able to have my final board meeting in person. And honestly, I realized the value of being an in-person SMOB when that was taken away from me. I think my favorite part of being SMOB was being able to interact with students, hearing one-on-one what they needed from me. So when that luxury was taken away, I had to really get creative through Instagram polls and messaging students on Google Classroom, just trying to get an idea of what was important to them and to guide them through the pandemic that way in my position as SMOB. So if there's anything I could change, it would definitely be just a little bit more time in person with students, because that was my favorite part of being SMOB anyways. So
what was the biggest challenge you faced during your term?
The biggest challenge, and I think that this is something that all SMOBs deal with throughout the term, not just in a singular event, is being able to trust all your decisions. When I was SMOB, we were entering back into school in person. We were dealing with masks. We were dealing with very, very uncertain news about COVID. And so I had to trust that me as a board member, as an elected official, had the information I needed to make the best decision for my constituents, the students of AACPS. And there were times where I got pushback from that stakeholder and from parents and from staff. But again, I had to trust that I was making the best information with the information I had that they didn't. And so that was really hard to do at 18 years old. But it was a skill that I was able to cultivate and is helping me now as I'm in college, and I hope will help me as I enter adulthood.
Why do you think the student board member is such an important position?
I think it's important for a lot of reasons, but the one I've seen time and time again, personally, is it provides the other board members a window into the micro effect of their macro decisions. when we were talking about Brightspace versus Google Classroom, I was able to provide insight on like apps, the difference between the Brightspace app and the Google Classroom app. And the other board members, the adults, they didn't have to deal with that. They didn't consider it. But by providing that perspective, it changed the discourse in the room, and we were able to make a better policy because of that. And the student member isn't just for the students, it's for the entire community. And by having a student board member in that room, it improves the decisions that the board makes, and it just helps everyone, teachers, students, faculty, and the overall community.
The student member position bridges gaps. I feel like that I went through AACPS from first grade, starting in at Seven Oaks Elementary School to MacArthur Middle School to Meade High School. And I saw the school system on its best days, its worst days, and every day in between. And some board members, some administrators just don't see that, and to no fault of their own. And the student member is there to really fill in those gaps and really give them a full insight to the school system. I remember a number of times when I would really press hard during a meeting because they would be talking about something and they would say it's going one way, and I knew it was not going like that, especially when we reopened the schools in March of 2021. So the student member position is vital, and the student member with full voting rights, that actually adds an air of, I want to say, autonomy to the position, because now you're not beholden to another member to try and make sure that your voice is heard, because you know that you have the right and your voice will be heard.
What advice do you have for future student board members?
I think the best advice that I can give is to stay true to yourself throughout the position. And as simple as that sounds, you'll be dealing with lots of different stakeholders. And when you're 17, 18 years old, you're very impressionable. So the people around you can convince you to change your views. But I walked into the position, I knew I had three main goals, one of them being like the equitable distribution of funding. And through every aspect of the decisions I made in SMOB, I always kept that value up front. It's hard because when you're the SMOB, you want to help every single student and you want to make sure you can fix all the problems, but you really want to focus on the ones that are most important to you and the ones that you think will impact the most students positively. So keeping that in mind, making sure you're representing the student voice, is the best way to go about it. And you will feel fulfilled no matter what you do in this position, because it's just so rewarding to have that opportunity in the first place. But if you really want to make the most of it, stay true to yourself in every decision that you make.
Those are some really great words of advice. Going to our current SMOB, in your opinion, what is the best part about being the SMOB?
Dr. Bedell. No, I'm kidding. But he is great. I always do enjoy sitting next to him. He's a funny guy. We always crack jokes. But besides that, the colleagues are great to work with. It's so great hearing other perspectives on issues. But my favorite part of the job is school visits, definitely. Going into schools, seeing the effect of the work you're doing with your colleagues, seeing that even though it might seem futile in the moment or it might get frustrating, you can always see that there are very real children behind this who need your help and need you to keep on going forward. It is just so humbling to see that you are representing all these amazing students at ACPS. And that would have to be my favorite part of the job.
Thank you all so much for being here today. You guys are some really, really incredible people and have been some very impactful and just amazing SMOBs. So thank you so much for your service to our community here in AACPS and beyond in your college years, and to Zach, which will soon be your college years. Thank you guys.
Welcome back to Teen Talk. I'm joined again by the amazing Dr. Arend. Jumping back into it, what were some of the most exciting things you got to do as student member?
Well, aside from like voting on the renewal of the contract of the superintendent, which was pretty exciting, I got to travel.
Really?
Yes. So the school board goes to a variety of conventions, and unless anybody, these are not boondoggles, these are legitimate conventions. And so I got to go to Atlantic City, which in those days was not, but I got to go to Atlantic City. I got to go to Atlanta, where I got to interact with a variety of other student board members or a variety of other board members. We went to San Francisco for a conference. And so that was actually kind of exciting, because if you think about it, you're 16, 17 years old, and you're going to these conferences not with your parents, not with your family, but with your board colleagues. And that was actually really important to making you feel part of the board, part of the team. That built up the esprit de corps. I still remember George Asaki and his wife Nobu, who were of Japanese descent, taking us to a Japanese restaurant in San Francisco and ordering sushi in Japanese. And we're all like sitting on the floor in this restaurant, and I can give you story after story like that. So that was one of the most exciting things, to being able to travel essentially as an adult, interacting with peers in an adult environment.
That is incredible. I want to go to San Francisco. Are we going to do a Teen Talk trip to San Francisco?
I recommend it. I go there every year now. Not with the
Wonderful.
board, but for other reasons. But I love San Francisco.
Yeah, not with the board. What were some of the challenges you faced while serving on the Board of Education?
I would say the biggest challenge was being able to deal with public pressure on issues. I mentioned again the renewal of the contract of the superintendent. So having people call you at home, which happened occasionally, getting letters from people. So I would say that was probably one of the biggest challenges. Also, trying to differentiate, and not that this was a real hard task, but trying to differentiate who the board member is from who the president of CRASC is, with a view that I had been the president of CRASC. When I was on the board, a guy named Bruce Robertson was president of CRASC. And so he had his role and I had my role. And it was very important that we each played our role. His role was to represent the students of Anne Arundel County. My role was to provide a student position and represent all the people of Anne Arundel County. So not that it was a hard task, but I think that's an important distinction that anybody running for a board position would need to understand. They're not CRASC's person on the board. They're their own person on the board. CRASC has a job, a very important job. The student member has a job, a very important job, but they're different jobs.
Absolutely. As someone in CRASC, like I said earlier, that is definitely something that we have to distinguish every now and then. How has the role as a student member of the board impacted your life after AACPS, and what opportunities did this position open up for you as a student that you don't think you would have had otherwise?
Well, I think one thing it really did was show me the importance of student participation in the political process. Now, I got to go back historically a little bit. I started on the board in 1975. That's not too many years from the protests at Columbia, at Kent State, a variety of other places. You still had the Students for Democratic Society that were engaging in terrorist acts throughout the country. You had the Weathermen and various other groups. And student activism in the 60s tended to be associated with violent protests, bombings, things like that. And there was a transformation that took place. And I'm not exactly sure how it took place, but it did take place in about 1973, 1974, just as I was coming in to CRASC. And this was very important in terms of how I saw myself as CRASC president and as board member. It was not one of us versus them, students versus teachers, students versus administration. It was one of, we're all members of the educational community. Let's work together. We have unique insights. We have unique perspectives. Let's bring it together as part of the system. So, I testified before the governor, as I mentioned. I testified before the legislature. I was on the board. We worked with the board. We worked with the county council. And so I think one of the most important things I learned then is that by working through the system, as part of the system, you can get a lot done. The other thing, and this I think is a lesson for today, bipartisanship can work. I know as we look at our country today, it doesn't look like it's working. And things are very different in 2023 than they were in 1974 or 1975. But bipartisanship can work. You have to want to make it work. You have to have the right people, but you have to make an effort. As I mentioned before, the bill to give the student board member a vote was sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican. And so that lesson of being able to work through the system and being able to work in a bipartisan way is something I've kept with me. And so if I'm giving advice to people today, whether it's individuals your age who want to go into politics, whether it's people a little bit older that want to go into politics, it's you can do it if you work through the system. You can change the system, and you can do it in a bipartisan way.
Absolutely. Those are some beautiful words of advice, Dr. Arend. What did the student member of the board position mean to you?
Well, that's a good question. And I think as a 16-year-old going on the board, on the one hand, it's a huge shot to the ego. It's like, wow, I'm on the school board. Isn't this really, really cool? But then you start to see it's a lot of work. We used to get these board packets a couple times a month, and you would have to read through them, and I would do that assiduously. I would read through the packets. I would look at what was going on. I'd look at any questions. So it was a lot of work. So being a student, being a board member, yeah, great boost to the ego, but it also gave me an understanding that as you proceed in a career, there's a lot of work to do. And so you need to do the work, you need to be prepared. And I think as a student member, you're thinking to yourself, I got to be more prepared than my colleagues. I have to be sure that I never screw up. I have to be sure that I've always done the reading, that I'm always prepared. So it kind of gave you that little extra incentive that you then hopefully carry with you throughout your career as you go into various areas.
Absolutely. That you're just filled with great advice. I'm sorry. You just amaze me.
Well, it's just I'm an old man. That's all. That's all that means. It's
goodness.
just you get older, you get these things.
Well, what advice do you have for future student members considering running for this position?
First of all, they need to do a cost-benefit analysis, and they honestly need to say, what do I want my senior year to look like? If somebody wants to take 1 million AP courses, and we didn't have 1 million in my day. They barely, I'm not exaggerating. I think AP appeared like 2 years before that. But if you want to do 1 million AP courses, it might be a challenge. It might be too much work. If you're on a sports team, if there's some other club that you're heavily engaged in, it might be too much work. So you need to do a cost-benefit analysis. What will I miss out on if I go on the board? And understand that very well. But then you need to understand also, on the other side, the benefit is that being on the board is unlike any kind of educational experience you will ever have as a high school student. You will see things that no high school student ever sees. I mean, what high school students are involved in contract negotiations with the teachers union, for instance, or the renewal of the superintendent's contract, or the details of capital budget allocation and things like that. You'll see things you will have never seen. You'll also see people from perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't see. And you'll learn a lot. And I think you'll grow up a lot. So there's tremendous benefits, but there are costs. So you need to ask yourself, what do you want your senior year to be like? So for instance, my senior year, I took, I think, one less course, or I did one course as a tutorial, with the view that the board was going to be much more taking up my time, and I needed to be able to recognize that. If I wouldn't have been on the board, then maybe I would have run for president of MASC, but maybe I would have done some more rigorous courses in certain areas that I didn't do. Now, I have absolutely no regrets on this, but I think anybody considering it needs to weigh those things, the benefits versus the costs.
Incredible. Well, you've been the most incredible guest. Where can our viewers find you after this interview?
So I think I'm going to go to the restroom right after this interview. No. So after this interview, anybody can find me on, I have a Twitter account. It's just AREND. That's my last name, Arend. ARENDA. So ARENDA, A for Tony, well, A for Anthony. ARENDA. That's my Twitter account. I have an Instagram account, which is really easy. It's Anthony_Clark_Arend. So it's not like I'm hiding behind anything. Or anybody can email me at ARENDA, so ARENDA, at Georgetown, spelled out, .edu. So please feel free to contact me. I've thoroughly enjoyed interacting with current students, former students. And Cameron, I want to thank you for being such an amazing host You're such a natural at this. I hope you continue to do even more amazing things as you go to college and move into the next phase of your career.
Well, thank you so much. That means so much to me. And I actually follow you on Instagram, and I love seeing pictures of your cat. It's the most incredible thing ever, honestly.
I have a cat. We should probably put in a plug for Choi.
Absolutely.
So Choi is, I lost a cat in October. My cat Oop passed. He was about 17 years old. And I got another cat named Choi. So there are many, many Instagram features of Choi. And now, you know, in Vietnam, they're currently celebrating the Year of the Cat.
Absolutely.
So it's a special
It's
time.
perfect. Yes, I have a cat named Hazel, so maybe the next episode is a Choi and Hazel playdate.
I think
There
that
we
would be
go.
fine. That would be great.
Absolutely. I want to thank our former SMOBs so much for joining us virtually and give a very special thanks to Dr. Aaron for being in the studio today. You've been an absolutely just fantastic guest. Thank you for all of your words of wisdom. Do not forget, high school juniors can apply to run for student member of the board this month. Keep your eyes out for more information to come on the AACPS website and on the Krask Instagram. If you are interested in running in the future, make sure to talk to your SGA advisor about participating in this year's election. Do you want to find out more? Krask is hosting a SMOB Information Night on February 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Check out other important dates at the conclusion of this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time on Teen Talk.